morning will be delivered by Professor Dr. Lucia Liu, Severinghaus. She's actually traveling and will not be able to deliver the address online this morning unless she's here by some chance or other. However, her keynote address has already been recorded and will be played back to you shortly. If you have any questions for Professor Severinghaus after this session, please email them to her. Allow me now to introduce her to you. Professor Dr. Lucia Liu Severinghaus is a retired research fellow at the Biodiversity Research Center, Academia Sinica, Taiwan, and an ornithologist who specializes in avian ecology and behavior. She received a PhD in natural resources from Cornell University in 1983, and academic honors including an honorary fellowship of the American Ornithologists Union and membership in the International Ornithological Committee. In 1998, she was named one of the most influential people in Taiwan in the last 4 centuries by Commonwealth, a prominent Taiwan magazine, and received the Forest and Nature Conservation Award from the Council of Agriculture, Taiwan, in 2010. She also received the Special Achievement Award during the International Festival of Owls in 2013 and was elected as the president of the International Ornithologists Union from 2014 to 2018. Lucia began her studies on the Lanyu scops owl in the 1970s, and she made a documentary about the owl, Doo-Doo-Woo, the story of the Lanyu scops owl, in 1993, which was picked up by the National Geographic Channel. She also led a team of scholars in producing the Avifauna of Taiwan, a 3-volume tome that compiles information on the morphology, systematics, ecology, behavior, vocalization, and conservation needs of birds in Taiwan. With the sponsorship given by the Taiwan Forestry Bureau, she has also been working with the RAPTOR Research Group of Taiwan to document the migration route and breeding locations of the gray-faced buzzard. Without further ado, let us now all sit back and listen to Dr. Severinghaus's keynote address. Please proceed to play the recording, Dr. Puan.
Afik, there's no sound.
Okay. Sorry.
Meet in person, hopefully in the next ARRCN Symposium. The theme of this year's ARRCN Symposium is Strengthening Connections and Collaborations in Raptor Conservation and Research in the Changing Environment. This map shows how much sea level has risen from 1992 to 2014. The redder the color, the higher the rise. So you can see the change is not uniform in the world's oceans. This region has some of the world's highest sea level rises. When we talk about sea level rise, it doesn't necessarily just mean the water level changed. It also means the weather pattern, the rainfall, the temperature, the habitat conditions of the area and the adjacent areas are all affected. And that means if the trend continues, our region will suffer some major land loss, habitat change, and accompanying shifts in the distribution and habitat competition in biodiversity. Raptors in our region, if not already, will definitely be subjected to many new challenges. So it is extremely important and timely that we focus our effort on improving our knowledge on the raptors and doing our basic research to be prepared for the changing environment. With that as a background, I would like to use my research on a small island as an example to show the importance of understanding a species for its conservation. I studied Lanyu scarp's owl on Lanyu Island. Some of you know it is very difficult to study nocturnal species. First, we're limited to what we can see at night. That is only the small area lit by our flashlights. An owl may be sitting right next there on the tree next to us, but unless it moved or it called, otherwise we wouldn't know it's there. Another aspect of the difficulty is our bodies normally will want to sleep at night, but the owls are only active at night. However, with perseverance, we can overcome difficulties and learn a great deal about our target species. This map shows where Lanyu is. You can see China, Taiwan, and Lanyu is marked with a red circle just below the Tropic of Cancer, and Philippines is at the bottom. Lanyu is a small island, oceanic and volcanic in origin, with steep slopes, rugged topography, some small flatlands around the island and in the interior. This is the home of the seagoing Aboriginal tribe, the Dao people. They live in 6 villages around the island, and they traditionally go fishing in these beautiful boats that they build by hand. Lanyu is hot in the summer. It averages 215 rainy days a year, and is frequently hit by typhoons, as you can see on this weather map, where Lanyu is marked with a red heart. The habitat on Lanyu is diverse and dissected. Although the traditional local culture is marine, small-scale slash-and-burn agriculture kept parts of the island in different stages of succession. Small patches of mature forest can be found in gullies or other sheltered areas. This is how we got around the island. And the tent is not for us to sleep in, but to protect our gear against the rain at night. We did what most researchers do. We caught our owls, we marked them, we measured them, we recorded everything we needed to know. And we color marked as many birds as possible. And this picture shows roughly how large a Lanyu scarp's owl is. We tape recorded as many owl vocalizations as possible. When I started the study in 1985, I didn't have much money nor modern equipment, but I wanted to know where the owls were and how many there were. So what we did was we tried tallying the number of owls by what we heard calling. 3 of us would be listening simultaneously from 3 different locations, not too far from each other. Each of us would write down what we heard at what time, what kind of a call, and the direction of the call. Then afterwards, we triangulated our records to decide how many birds there were, to estimate the population size in the area. This was like doing radio tracking, except instead of using radio transmitters, we were using the owl's voice. And after a year, I estimated there were several hundred owls in the areas we surveyed. Besides counting their numbers, I wanted to know the owl's ecology and habitat limitations. What are its reproductive parameters, its breeding behavior, and of course, what is the total population size? Isolated on a small island with only limited habitat, is there inbreeding? Is it losing genetic diversity? This map shows the rugged topography of the island. We monitored owls in all the areas marked in red. My main study site was the Yongxing Forest near the southeastern coast of the island. Here it is marked with an arrow. The habitat we covered included shrubby habitat like this, the young forests where the Dao people will go to collect firewood, and mature forests like this, where they harvested fruits and timber. And this person standing there is about 175 centimeters in height. We mapped our study site very carefully. We recorded all the large trees by species and gave each tree a number. We used these maps to note the locations of every owl we saw. And the maps were very useful in helping us to know where we were at night. It is really sort of surprising that a place so familiar in daytime can be so confusing at night. So these maps helped us to not get lost in the darkness. Through repeated misnetting, we kept at least 80% of the study population color marked for individual identification. We sexed the owls by their vocalization, their behavior, and later on through molecular techniques. We spent a lot of time in the field monitoring their behavior, especially during the breeding season. For every owl we saw, we recorded its identity, its location, its behavior, and whether it was interacting with other owls. We radio tracked the movements of some adults and juveniles, and we monitored the mating, cavity use, and reproductive success. I wanted to know the diet of the Lanyu scarps owl. This species does not produce pellets like some other species of owls or diurnal raptors. But male owls provided food to the females during incubation, and also the parents provided food to the young after the nestlings hatched. We observed the nests we found and recorded what males brought back during incubation. This figure shows the feeding history at one nest between mid-May and mid-June. Each red horizontal bar represented one visit by the male, and the female is in blue, and the other color is when we couldn't tell which sex of the adult came back. Unfortunately, we could only identify a small portion of the larger and brighter colored prey due to the distance and the very dim light. My assistant assembled and waterproofed some pinhole camera lenses and mounted them on the outside as well as on the inside of some cavities to record what prey were brought back. Sample size was small, and there were still prey that we could not identify. Finally, we collected feces from every owl we caught and used fecal analysis to obtain a more complete picture of the owl's diet. As shown on this figure, Lanyu's scops owl was primarily insectivorous. It also ate some other invertebrates as well as small vertebrates. In the breeding season, the open column, they ate more Orthopteran and Homopteran. In the non-breeding season, they ate more beetles, cicadas, and Hemipteran in the gray column. Lepidoptera was important for both seasons. On this figure, the diet of male owl is shown in black, female in open column, and young in gray. The top half is the non-breeding season, the bottom, the breeding season. In non-breeding season, male owls ate significantly more aerial prey than adult females. These would be the dragonflies, flies, moths, hymenopterans. In the breeding season, males ate significantly less terrestrial non-insect arthropods than the females and the juveniles. These will be the spiders and the centipedes. This result suggests that males and female owls probably used different forest strata to some degree. We radio tracked owl movements. At that time, I could not afford radio transmitters. Talking to the boss of AVM Instrument Company at a conference, she offered to sell me parts and assigned a technician to teach me how to assemble them. This greatly reduced the cost and allowed me to do the work that was necessary. So I want to say thank you, AVM, for your generosity and your support. To radio track, two of us took a location reading every half an hour simultaneously throughout the night and found during the non-breeding season, the owls had varying degree of range overlap. Each color patch is the activity range of one owl. Overlap existed during the spring also. This map shows the range of a pair of owls and a male neighbor. On this map, identical numbers shows where each owl was at the same time. The shaded area were their overlapping activity areas. We can see the pair shared a large area, and each shared a very small area with their neighbor. The female and the neighbor did not use their overlapping area more than expected. The two males both used the overlapping area significantly more than expected, but never at the same time. This is what could happen if they met. In the early years, I thought Lanyu's scops owl was not territorial. For many times, I saw males at their cavities, showing no aggression towards other owls approaching and foraging nearby. But as we can see in this photograph here, they did fight very vigorously. You can see one male had red and white leg band, the other male green and white. So the question was, if they tolerated owls coming close to the nest cavity, what triggered such fights, even if such fights were uncommon? I designed a test and made some life-size owl decoys. We placed a decoy by a nest cavity and observed the owner's reaction to the decoy for 25 minutes. Then we placed a recording of the owl calls for 25 minutes to compare the reaction of owls at that cavity. The results were very clear. When we placed the decoy, or the Lanyu scapsal specimen that I borrowed from our museum, there were no reactions. Each time we played the tape with the owl calls, there was strong reaction. This pattern was the same, regardless which season we did the test. The owls fought singing birds and tolerated silently foraging owls. Lanyu scapsal have periodic counter-singing bouts during the night. Counter-singing most likely allowed them to know where each other's location was and to avoid unnecessary encounters. Just to show you, it is not necessary to have a decoy to induce aggressive behavior. An owl would try very hard to get inside a cassette player to get at the calling bird. My poor decoy got such a beating through the ears that both its ears got torn off. One limiting factor on Lanyu is there are no cavity-making birds or mammals. Cavity forming took time, and some cavities disappear with time. When the tree fell down, or when the limb broke off, the cavities are lost. And being natural cavities, and not nest boxes, all cavities are not created equal. On this table, you can see cavity number 11 was used every year and produced the largest number of young in the 6 years. The other cavities were used fewer years. In addition, you can see owls sometimes shifted from one cavity to another. We found some owls nested in cavities in very poor condition. This cavity was very rotten. You can see the female incubating at the bottom here, and the male perched above guarding the nest. This nest was destroyed by a typhoon before the eggs hatched. On this slide, the left side is the same picture I showed you earlier of the Yongxing forest. On the right side, this was the same forest, same area after a major typhoon, and this person was I. I wanted to know the cavity dynamics in Yongxing forest in order to understand the restrictions cavity availability placed on the breeding of owls. We checked every tree with a DBH larger than 30 centimeters in Yongxing and measured every cavity present with all these variables as shown here. We found 258 cavities. 94 cavities were used by owls. The others were not usable for one reason or another. Only 11 cavities were not used for unknown reasons. I had hoped to monitor the cavity size changes through time. The complicated shape and structure of many of the cavities made monitoring extremely difficult. And since every cavity had to be climbed separately, the idea was eventually abandoned. I have to show you that I climb trees too. This was I. I had intended on sharing the tree climbing work, but I had so much trouble getting down from the second tree, I caused more trouble than I helped. And that was the end of my tree climbing career. This is the map of nest tree distribution in Yongxing Forest. Each dot is a nest tree, and the size of the dot showed how many years that tree was used by an owl. You can see why owls concentrated in this forest during the breeding season. Not all 94 cavities were used by owls every year. Some had gaps up to 11 years before being used again. Some were used multiple times, some only once. Regardless how many cavities there were on a tree, only one cavity was used at any one time. Cavity use frequency was related to its entrance height, cavity width, cavity floor area, and cavity chamber height. Cavity used more times produced more young. The number of owls we saw each month showed this cyclic pattern. Population size was greatly reduced every August and September. By this year, we got better at detecting owls, so the histogram was taller. But what might be the explanation for this cyclic pattern? I had three hypotheses. The first one, maybe the owls were still there, only they were silent and very difficult to see. The second one, maybe the owls moved out of Yongxing Forest to other parts of the island. And the third one, maybe the owls migrated out of Lanyu. To learn if the owls were there, but not seen by us, we strung up the same number of mist nets for the same number of nights in the same locations for a whole year in the forest. This is because although we couldn't tell if the owls were there, they could still be caught by the mist nets. And the result is summarized on this figure. You can see there was fluctuation from month to month in the forest based on the number of owls caught per net per night. We radio tracked some adults and young and found that some owls moved to other parts of Lanyu after the breeding season. Their wintering habitat was shrubby with young trees as seen in this picture. Some adults moved back to Yongxing Forest the following breeding season, but not the fledglings. To find out if Lanyu scarps owls migrated out of Lanyu, we visited two of the northernmost islands in the Philippines. These were just south of Lanyu. We found Otus elegans on these islands, but did not find any Lanyu owls. How did I know? These owls on these islands spoke with a Philippine accent. We also visited 11 islands in the Ryukyus and found owls on most of these islands. They also spoke with different accents. My conclusion was Lanyu scarps owl did not migrate out of Lanyu. As shown in the figure of cyclic population size that I showed you earlier, not all owls moved away from Yongxing Forest at the end of the breeding season. Some stayed through winter, so Lanyu scarps owl is only partially migratory. The obvious question is, who migrated and who stayed and why? Analyzing our data collected between 1999 and 2006, we found 35 to 47% of the owls were residents. An owl may be a resident 1 year and a migrant the next year. And among 61 owls present for 5 years and more, only 3 always remained and 9 always migrated. If we look at the known aged owls, that is those banded as fledglings, male owls, the tendency of them to stay in winter increased from 1 to 2 year olds to 3 years and older. Among owls 3 years and older, more males behaved as residents than females. What are the cost benefits for staying or migrating? The first thing we looked at was body weight. On this figure, the male is on the left and the female is on the right. And this is the end of the breeding season. This is the end of the winter season. The black columns are migrants and the open columns, the residents. The weight of migrants and residents did not differ significantly at the end of the breeding season. But at the end of January, all owls gained weight, and migrants gained significantly more weight. My entomology colleague, Dr. Manmiao Yang, found the average orthopteran biomass in the owl's wintering site significantly more abundant than in Yongxing Forest, regardless whether it was inside the forest, at the edge of forest, or in grassland outside the forest. So owls that migrated away after the breeding season benefited from more abundant prey. This figure shows the average weight of owls throughout the year. Males are the lightest in May and the females in July. From early in the spring to egg laying in May, male owls spend long hours displaying, calling at cavities to attract females and to fend off competing males. Some owls were seen calling throughout the night, rarely left the cavities to forage. This period of time in the early spring should be the most taxing period for the males in the annual cycle. When incubating, female owls rarely left the cavities to forage, relying completely on the provision of males. After nestlings hatch in late May or June, they continue to stay around the cavities for at least 2 weeks, relying on the prey brought back by males, which were often fed to the hungry young first. So female weight apparently continued to drop at this period of time. Peter Rothery and I estimated the seasonal survival of owls using program search and found that male survival was lowest during May, and for female, it was June. The body weight data seem consistent with mortality cycle. Also, male survival was 7% lower than that of females. What are the benefits to a resident owl? The left columns are the males, the right columns are females. The black for breeders, the open columns for non-breeders, and the y-axis is the percent of residents. This figure shows that significantly more breeding males were residents than non-breeding males. But the difference was not significant for females. So Lanyu's Scops owl traded between gaining weight and having more opportunity to breed. Male owls, 3 years and older, tended to opt for breeding at the cost of not gaining as much weight. This could have led to their higher mortality. Competition for cavity on the island is primarily intraspecific. There were a few pairs of brown hawk owls on the island. Their smaller number made them not a major competitor for Lanyu's Scops owls. There were no predators on adult Lanyu's Scops owls, while snakes and rodents could prey on eggs and young. In the 2019 ARRCN Symposium in Bali, I reported on the serial monogamy of the Lanyu's Scops owl and how this species showed frequent extra-pair copulation during courtship, but paternity analysis found no extra-pair fertilization. This figure shows the pairing history of a number of owls. It is a very complex figure, so it is difficult to decipher the relationship. I summarized the mating history of one female on this slide. In her 10 years of breeding, she had 6 mates, and this table also showed that each of her mates had other females they mated with during their breeding history. I will not repeat what I reported on in the 2019 symposium today, but I do want to say that cavity competition led to the frequent mate change and produced offspring with multiple parentage. And this complicated multiple parentage prevented the population from inbreeding problems. From what I reported earlier, you can see that owls sometimes changed cavities, and they also changed mates. What are the factors that affected whether an owl wants to change cavities or use the same cavity, or to change or stay with the same mate? Our data showed that about 50% of the males and 40% of the females reused cavities they used the year before. Successful breeders of both sexes showed higher site fidelity, but their fidelity did not necessarily bring higher reproductive success. Site fidelity increased with age, breeding experience, and years of prior residence in that cavity for males, but this was not the same, not the same for females. In terms of mate fidelity, we found 53% of the breeding pairs reunited the next year. Successful breeders had higher fidelity, but their reproductive output was not related to their mate fidelity. This means sticking to the same mate did not necessarily bring higher success. For newly formed pairs, only 41% reunited. For previously mated pairs, 71% reunited. So fidelity increased with pair duration. Mate fidelity was not associated with the age of either sex. It was positively associated with the breeding experience of males, but not females. We used path analysis to tease apart the relationship between mate and site fidelity, and we found that site fidelity of male owls increased with both previous breeding success and years of prior residence in the cavity. But site fidelity of female owls was related to previous breeding success following a win, stay, lose, switch model. This means if she bred successfully, she was inclined to use the same cavity the following year. If she failed, she would switch to a different cavity. Regarding site fidelity versus mate fidelity, we found mate fidelity was related to female site fidelity and pair duration. Although mate fidelity was higher after successful breeding, it was really a byproduct of the site fidelity of successful breeders. To summarize what I talked about before, there was some difference in the diet of male and female owls, suggesting they could be using different parts of the forest to forage. Male owls suffered higher mortality than females. This species is a partial migrant, but each owl can decide whether to migrate or to stay each year. There is a trade-off between to migrate or to stay, in whether to gain weight or to have advantage at obtaining cavities for reproduction. This trade-off was a result of limited usable cavities. This limitation strongly affected the breeding and migration of the species. Owls copulated readily during courtship and cavity competition, and often not with the owl that was their eventual mate. But no extra pair copulation was seen in late April or in May, when eggs were laid. Paternity analysis showed no extra pair fertilization. Cavity tenure is short. Pairing relationship very complex. Pair bond is short, and each owl, especially those that lived and bred many years, had multiple mates, and each mate could also have several mates. Such multiple mating with different owls definitely will result in higher genetic diversity in the offspring. Successful breeders had higher cavity site fidelity. In males, we found site fidelity increased with age, breeding experience, and the number of years of prior residence in the cavity. But this relationship was not found in the females. Successful breeders reunited for the following season more frequently. Mate fidelity in males was associated with breeding experience, but not for the females. Site fidelity of females was related to previous breeding success following a Winstay loose switch model, which means if she was successful, she will be inclined to reuse the same cavity, and if she failed, she will be inclined to move to a new place. So in this owl, whether a pair remained together was related to the female's site fidelity, and that was related to breeding success. So it was breeding success dependent. On Lanyu, the primary factor that shaped the breeding system and migration behavior of this top predator is limited cavity availability. Otis elegans on other small Pacific islands may be subjected to additional constraints besides this limitation. For example, the owls on Minami Daito are the smallest of all that we have encountered. It could reflect that Minami Daito has more restriction on food resources availability. By the way, Minami Daito is one of the small islands in the Ryukyus. As I traveled through the region studying Otis elegans, I noticed that with the exception of northern Okinawa, this species was the only owl on 14 small islands. That is, if we ignore the very few large brown hawk owl found on some islands. We know in many parts of Asia, different species of otis can be found sympatrically. Why was Otis elegans the only otis owl on these islands? And why are Otis elegans found only on these tiny oceanic islands and not on Asia mainland, where other otis species are found? Is this small insectivorous owl not competitive enough against other species of otis owls, which are more aggressive or vigorous? Is Otis elegans being excluded on the continent or on other larger islands? What will be the future of this small owl if islands are reduced in size or disappear altogether with the continued rising of the sea? Or when climate change brought it in contact with other otis owls that are more aggressive, more competitive, more vigorous? Are other species of small island owls in Southeast Asia facing the same threats? Can they compete with other owls for long-term survival? The theme of this symposium is strengthening the connections and collaboration for the conservation and research of raptors in a changing environment. Obviously, collaboration and connections will be crucial. Although we're not together for this symposium in person, I hope we can still work together to formulate conservation strategies and actions. We need to work hard, we need to anticipate potential problems, and I wish all great success. I wish to thank all my assistants who worked so hard through all these years on this study. I couldn't have done it without them. I want to thank Lanyu Middle School and Zhongshan Station for hosting us. I want to thank the Dao people for putting up with us, outsiders, all these years. And the main funding for this study was provided by the National Science Council, the Forestry Bureau, and Academia Sinica. Here is a composite of pictures of some of my staff members. Thank you for your listening.